Is there anybody out there? And if there is, what does that mean for us? We often see ourselves as a superior species, that humans are the dominant intelligence. We believe that we're singular, special, exceptional even. But what if we aren't? What would the implications be for humanity if intelligent life is discovered somewhere in the cosmos?
I guess it's in general, the fact that people have such a hard time believing all of these announcements points to the fact that people aren't, most outlets aren't conveying information accurately. They're not fulfilling the trust that they have. Al Jazeera.
Well, it speaks to the question, the wider question, who speaks for planet Earth? And my answer to that is nobody does. Nobody, no politician, no national leader, no religious leader, no scientist can really claim to speak for everyone. And what about the billions of people who have no voice? So I mean, yes, you could say that if this actually happens, a lot of those people, politicians, religious leaders, scientists, will speak out immediately. There'll be a scramble to be first. There'll be a scramble for narrative control. Maybe you should say it is the fairest and most equitable thing that the person who makes the discovery should announce it. But in reality, everyone will probably go at once. But yeah, who speaks for planet Earth?
But do we need to have a game plan about that?
Yeah, I think it would be helpful.
By the way, the SETI community does have what they call a protocol for this, which say a universe, an observatory makes a detection that they think is actually a signal. What do? There actually is a plan. And the first thing they do, they don't announce it immediately. They contact other observers, other observatories, and they say, hey, could you look at this star? We think we've seen something, but they don't announce it to the world. They try to get confirmation, and they try to make absolutely sure that what they're seeing is not some false, interference from Earth, some military signal or something, which has happened before. And then once they are convinced it's real, then you tell the world. I mean, that's the protocol. You tell everybody.
SETI tells the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's detected by in the way we imagine, SETI imagines, then they tell the world.
And SETI is based where?
Well, okay. There's a group in California called the SETI Institute that's sometimes confused with the field of SETI. But SETI is a field of inquiry that's all over the world at many, many institutions. So it's not based in any one place.
Please.
Yeah, that's great. We do also have sort of international organizations that deal with controversial astronomical matters. In particular, the International Astronomical Union, the IAU, that has made controversial decisions before. 20 years ago, the demotion of Pluto from a planet to a dwarf planet. And at the time, this was hotly debated, and there was a lot of pushback from people of all ages, from all countries. But at the same time, the international astronomical community, they were able to reach more or less a consensus. They were able to make a statement that was largely accepted, that Pluto is no longer a planet like the rest of the planets. And to a certain extent, it works because the International Astronomical Union, it is not actually a political organization. It isn't a very powerful organization either. It isn't a very well-funded organization. But it is also then an organization where actually not a lot of other interests interfere. My hope would be that it would be the International Astronomical Union that would take a lead on there. And it might not be a single statement. It might be a debate within the scientific community that over years congeals or solidifies into something, for instance, like we now have more or less a consensus on anthropogenic climate change.
It's funny you use that example because I think the The Pluto debate was handled very badly by the IAU. And there are a lot of us, including myself, in the astronomical community that don't accept that definition of planet that they came up with, and the supposed demotion of Pluto. I think we don't have to get way into that, but I think it's an example of
no,
them
please,
being
you can get a little bit into
sloppy.
it.
Well,
it's intriguing to me as an outsider.
Okay, so they define,
because this is kind of showing, there could be conflict over actually the messaging.
So in brief, they define planet by its gravitational effect on other objects, not by its intrinsic properties. And the way they defined it is such that if you moved Earth out into the Kuiper belt where Pluto is, Earth would no longer be a planet because it wouldn't have cleared its zone. So it's not a shining example.
We won't go down that rabbit hole, but the point is that you don't agree with how the decision they made.
Yeah,
how does that relate to
there are a lot of people in the community that don't agree. So I guess
would we unite?
You said maybe humanity would unite. The way it relates is that there's no simple and in fact the SETI protocols that I mentioned have been subject to a lot of debate. And of course, debate is healthy. There's a debate happening now about a second protocol, which is not, there's agreement roughly on if we detect something that we tell the world. But the debate now is, should we be sending out messages? It's called the METI debate, messaging extraterrestrial intelligence. And there's a lot of disagreement about that. People are trying to come up with a new protocol, but there's an argument that, well, if we're listening, we should be sending. It's only fair. There's another argument that says, hold on, we can't speak for Earth. And we don't know 100% that it's safe, because what if we did trigger something that got the attention of...
Is there anyone at this table that is fearful of sending messages out into the universe?
I'm not. I take the view, and correct me on the science, please, but we have been a detectable civilization for decades through our radio broadcasts, some other leakages from certain radar systems and things, and maybe even some of our satellites, if somebody out there has James Webb plus 10 or something. So I don't think you can get the toothpaste back in the tube on that.
That's kind of true, that we haven't been completely silent and completely invisible. But it's also true that if we were to send out very powerful messages right at stars that might be habitable, we would drastically change how visible we are. So that argument that sort of the horse has left the barn is not quite accurate in reference to this debate, because we can make ourselves much more noticeable and much more visible if we chose to message. But having said that, I personally am not fearful. I don't think you can kind of live in fear of the rest of the universe.
I would agree with that. I would also say that we cannot not communicate, right? Because even a lack of communication could be interpreted as a kind of communication. So imagine we had a spacecraft entering the solar system. Even if they were not sending out any radio messages or any light signals, just their presence itself could be interpreted. And sometimes, right, if you're not communicating at all, it can actually sort of make you appear even more suspicious, or potentially even more threatening, compared to if you are sort of very open and you're trying to sort of share as much as you can.
Nick, I'm wondering, is it possible, are these discussions happening in government, like in the US and the UK, that they're already here, that they're already on Earth? Extraterrestrials came and they're already present with us?
I can't rule it out, but I've seen no evidence for it.
But it goes back to my first question to you at the start of this, which is the phrase non-human intelligence. Can you just go a bit deeper into that? Because I'm just wondering, have you heard that conversation? Has it, even in the testimonies you mentioned, that they could already be on Earth?
You do hear people make the claim,
but the government, the UK and the US governments aren't investigating that?
Not to my knowledge. No, that goes, I think, too far. That does segue into something that's more science fiction and conspiracy than actual science.
Speaking of science fiction, yeah, please.
Maybe to add to that as well, right? You mentioned governments as well. And yes, politicians, including members of Congress, they're talking and they're debating. And I also agree with David's point about scientists are trying to be very cautious. At the same time, it is actually very hard for a lot of scientists to keep secrets. So if people at NASA had detected and had really found evidence of extraterrestrial life, I don't think NASA
it's
scientists...
impossible to keep. Nobody would want to keep it secret.
Exactly.
And if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to. We used to joke when I was a postdoc at a NASA research center, and there were some stories out there about, NASA's detected extraterrestrial life, but they're keeping it secret. We talked about, hey, if the boss came by and said, hey, we found this thing, but you've got to keep it hush hush. I used to joke with my friends, how long do you think that would remain secret? And the answer was, how long would it take to type it and hit send? There's no way anybody would have any motivation or would obey any command or any ability to keep a secret like that.
And yet, haven't governments kept certain facts secret that would have been called conspiracy a decade ago that have been recognized? Like, for instance, UFOs, UAPs.
Yeah, governments can and do keep secrets all the time. I mean, I think there is a distinction between the civilian scientific community and the world of government.
What I just described is the mindset and ability of the civilian scientific community, not the military.
No, and I agree with you absolutely on that. Now, if government acquired this information first, I think, the extent to which a secret leaks depends on a number of variables, the number of people who are privy to it, but also the penalties, imprisonment, for example, that could come from disclosing classified information. And to give a couple of historical examples, I mean, thousands of people were working on the Manhattan Project. It didn't actually leak out until the bomb was dropped. The breaking of the German codes during the Second World War, a lot of people have the misconception that was immediately the war ended out in the open. It wasn't. It was the late 60s before, for example, the breaking of the Enigma codes was actually made public. So governments can and do keep secrets.
So the government isn't really searching for, it seems to me, it's not searching for intelligent extraterrestrial life. It's just trying to protect against attack by a foreign country. Isn't that, is that right? Or
I think so, yes. I mean, in the United States right now, there is an office in the Pentagon called AARO, All Domain Anomalous Research Organization, which manages the UAP subject. But that's really more about, producing reports in response to congressional inquiries than it is about actively searching for UAP, NHI, whatever terminology we want to use. I mean,
that's a new one. What's NHI?
Non-human intelligence again. But the active search for extraterrestrial intelligence or non-human intelligence. That's much more of a scientific thing.
But when you say the government isn't searching, the military part of the government, the government also funds us, astrobiology and SETI, to some degree, mostly astrobiology. SETI's more privately funded, actually. But
can you explain astrobiology?
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt.
No,
really quick.
No problem. Astrobiology is basically the scientific study of life in the universe, which of course, a lot of it is geared towards trying to search for extraterrestrial life. But in fact, astrobiology funds a lot of research on Earth, studying what we call extremophiles, extreme life on Earth, and trying to understand the patterns and evolution of life on Earth so that we can be more sophisticated in understanding how we might find life elsewhere. So a lot of it is directed at sort of contextualizing terrestrial life and how it interacts with its environment so we can search elsewhere. But that's what astrobiology is.
Okay, so the government funds that as well, you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, we're not as well funded as the military, let's face it. But so there is a government funded effort to find extraterrestrial life, including for a long time in the U.S., there was a prohibition on the government funding SETI, this extraterrestrial intelligence. So it was just non-intelligent life. And there's some interesting political background behind that, but that's changed in the last few years, and now NASA is allowed to fund technosignature searches, and so there's some resources being put into looking for intelligent life as well.
I want to hear about technosignatures because I've heard it a few times today, but is what you're talking about including Mars? Because you mentioned Mars earlier. So what's the fascination with Mars?
So there are not currently technosignature searches on Mars, but there are definitely biosignature searches, and it's mostly.
What's the difference? Sorry.
No, so yeah, that's fine.
I need you to be specific,
no,
please.
Of course,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No.
Biosignatures are a biosignature would be evidence that's consistent with biology in some other part of the universe. A technosignature it is evidence of technology elsewhere. And it's changed a little bit from SETI because SETI was focused more on finding messages. And the idea of technosignatures is it doesn't have to be a message. They may not be trying to communicate with us or know anything about other life. It's just simply detecting the use of technology somewhere. So it's sort of broader. A signal would be a technosignature, but a technosignature doesn't have to be a signal, if that makes sense.
Which you're not looking for on Mars.
Right, because we know enough about Mars now to pretty much rule out there being technology and civilization there. And the possibility of even current life on Mars, it's possible that there's something underground, but the surface of Mars we know to be pretty hostile to life as we know it. But the main focus of our investigation of Mars is looking for signs of past life, because we've discovered enough about Mars to know that in the past it was much more Earth-like. There was liquid water. It was a habitable planet at the time when life was new on Earth. And so given what we've learned about what we think we know about the origin of life on Earth, there should have been an origin of life on Mars. And if there wasn't, that's a really interesting finding too, because it means there's something more unique about Earth than we understand right now.
Why? Why should there have been that at Mars?
What we think, what we've concluded about the origin of life, and I have to say this with the humility and the caveat that we don't fully understand the origin of life, but what we think is that it required liquid water, it required organic molecules, and some kind of energy source. And we know enough about ancient Mars to know that, in fact, it had copious liquid water that's not there on the surface anymore, but we see dried up riverbeds, we see dried up lakes, and we know there were sources of organic matter. And we know that Mars had a thicker, more protective atmosphere. So the conditions on early Mars seem to be similar to the conditions on early Earth that we think led to an origin of life. So there should have been an origin of life on Mars unless we're missing something. So we very much want to go and look for ancient life on Mars because finding it would be incredible, and ruling it out would also be really interesting and tell us something also about ourselves.
I think that's really interesting, like by what you said about ruling out life there. So if we have like a dozen examples of places where life could exist and they're ruled out, would that support the idea that maybe we are the only intelligent beings in the universe?
I think it would support it, but we have to add the caveat that it's very hard to prove a negative.
Yeah,
like, could you ever prove for sure that there's no life on Mars? Probably not, because maybe we're missing it, looking in the wrong place, looking in the wrong way. But nonetheless, if we explore Mars very thoroughly and find no evidence that there ever was any kind of early organic evolution preserved anywhere on the planet, then we start to move towards a worldview that there's something about Earth that doesn't necessarily mean that we're completely alone in the universe, but that we don't understand that was required for the origin of life. And in the long run, if we search many places like that and we never find any evidence that life ever got started anywhere else, then it does slowly, and this might take centuries, but it moves us towards a worldview that maybe we really are more unique than scientists currently think we probably are.
So what would that mean to you? Like what if we were alone in the universe? Then what is that? I'm just interested in how do you process that?
I personally, first of all, I know I won't live to have that knowledge, because I think, as I said, it would probably take at least centuries to really be able to reach that conclusion. But so it's hard for me to sort of project myself to, because it's not something I know I'll have to contend with. But I suppose it would lead me to a different worldview where there's something really unique and precious. I already feel like there's something unique and precious about Earth, but not in that sense of complex life only existing here. And there's been this sort of trend in science. You mentioned Copernicanism, this idea that the more we learn about the universe, the less special our location seems and the less special Earth seems. And in some sense, maybe the less special we seem, although we're not anywhere near that because, of course, we haven't found extraterrestrial life yet. But I think that it would very much reverse that view, right? That philosophical view. I think it would, if somehow I was presented with that knowledge in a certain way, it would probably lead me to really kind of question my sort of philosophical stance on a lot of things.
I'd be rather sad and disappointed myself because I think the universe would be certainly more interesting and possibly even more fun with extraterrestrials, other intelligences.
Yeah, it would also sort of make the question of the origin of life on Earth even more important, right? If life on this planet is truly the only one in the universe, how did it in fact come about, right? How was there a religious origin story that where God or some other kind of like supernatural being, supernatural intelligence at some point started life on Earth. If we are truly the only place where life could ever start in the universe, amidst all the planets in the universe, in all those galaxies, really
kind of reverses all kinds of assumptions that we've had, certainly since the Copernican revolution. And I think maybe, I don't know, it might be very good for kind of recruitment of people with a naturalistic worldview to more your worldview would be like, well, maybe they're right.
Well, yeah. So
Can you answer your own question? Would it change
so first of all, so I don't actually think that it's that we need to see that we're alone in the universe in order to prove that there is a supernatural origin, at least to human beings. So human beings, I think that based on revelatory evidence that there is, I believe that that we are a special and unique creation that was in heaven, that was sent down to earth. But if we were alone in the universe, meaning that there is no other extraterrestrial life, then I think nothing would change. We would be where we were like 200 years ago, and it wouldn't really there wouldn't be a need for this conversation. But I think that it fits with the way that Muslims, Christians have.
I think it was Carl Sagan who said it would be an awfully large waste of space.
I wonder though what
that would be. It would be an awfully large waste of space. Well, if I don't agree with that, because it would just be something that would be pointing to a very cosmic significance that we have as human beings. So that huge expanse of space would have a cosmic purpose, But if it would only be a waste of space if you're looking at it from like a utilitarian perspective, But I confess to having a pretty naturalistic view of the universe. But to me, that doesn't make me feel disconnected from the rest of the universe, because part of my sort of understanding of cosmic evolution is that, the Earth wouldn't be here without the birth and deaths of many stars. And, it's been said we are stardust, we are star stuff, which Harlow Shapley said, and then Carl Sagan copped from him. But anyways, that we are star stuff. And, whether or not there's anyone out there, the more we understand about our deep origins and our nature, we are connected with the rest of the universe. But I also agree to a sense of sort of that it would be disappointing, because the idea that just as the biodiversity on Earth is thrilling, and even on Earth discovering other creatures and other places and all that just amazing
evolution that's occurred and then just the diversity, thinking of that whole universe and of possibility out there, I confess to wanting there to be life and just the richness of evolution filling all those spaces. To me, that's a more exciting and kind of fulfilling vision of the universe than a universe where this is only happening on Earth.
And we may have an interesting dry run for this. I mean, I think you mentioned, Matthias, earlier, artificial intelligence, and it's come up a couple of times. And I think, it plays into the debate, which I think several of us have mentioned about how do you define, intelligence? Is it anything to do with technology? Is there a moral or spiritual aspect to this? But pretty soon we're going to have this debate about artificial intelligence. Some of us are having that debate already. Is it sentient? Is it about to become sentient? How could we ever know? Or is it just mimicking sentience? Some people already in some legal jurisdictions give personhood rights to some of the great apes, I believe. There will be a debate about whether we give personhood rights to AI at some stage. And this is going to be an interesting, I say dry run because this is happening now. The discovery of a non-human intelligence may take a little bit more time. So it's going to be an interesting practical demonstration of how we might, as humans, have this conversation.
And if we're so afraid of other intelligences, then why are we creating it?
Well, some people do want to pull the plug or at least pause.
That's right.
I thought it was interesting, Sheikh Hamza, earlier when you referenced, well, maybe the aliens have already self-destructed. I mean, were you referring to AI? What did you mean by that?
I think, well, I was just speaking to David's perspective on advanced technology is it makes us more powerful. And the more powerful we are, the more ability we have to inflict either harm or good. But the nature of desire for power, desire for money, desire for influence is that whenever somebody has a huge amount of power, they will use it normally for to destroy things, for some kind of selfish gain. I guess that's where David was coming from. So I was just kind of elaborating on his thing that playing along with his reasoning that if they have survived, then they're wiser and more intelligent than us. But I was just highlighting that it's an if.
Sure.
It's an if.
Society's faced a number of existential threats. It might be like a... Elon Musk talks about how we currently have all our eggs in one basket here on Earth. One big comet or asteroid strike, one devastating global pandemic, one nuclear war could wipe us out or at least set us back millennia.
Yeah. And
well, I mean, just following up on what you said, I mean, so there has been an argument made, and in fact, Carl Sagan was a big proponent of this, and I confess to have been very influenced by Carl Sagan, that this question we were discussing earlier of whether technological advancement would inevitably have to be accompanied by sort of moral or social advancement. And his claim was that it does have to be because of just what you're saying, that the civilizations that developed, say, nuclear weapons, but were still moral infants, would inevitably wipe themselves out. And therefore, there's sort of a natural selection that the civilizations we would encounter that had powerful technology would not be warlike and have that sort of, if we can use that word, primitive tendency to just be territorial and sort of violent with other creatures, because they would not last. But
that still assumes that they survive. It's assuming whether or not they survive is still an assumption. So it's still an if, so that was, maybe they've all destroyed themselves.
It's not an ironclad argument.
I want to get Matthias.
Thank you so much. And it is also possible that the biological parts of that civilization go extinct and the technological ones survive. So, Nick, you mentioned the example of an asteroid hitting Earth, right? If a big enough asteroid would hit Earth, could possibly destroy all human life on it, and all remnants of our civilization would be the robotic spacecraft that we have sent elsewhere in the solar system and beyond. It would be all the robots that we have on Mars currently, and Mars is the only planet that we know of that is entirely inhabited by robots so far.
But Earth is not currently vulnerable to that. Earth, 100 years ago, Earth was still under threat by an asteroid strike. We are no longer under threat by an asteroid strike because we have a space program and we have telescopes and we could detect an asteroid decades out that was going to, and we could do something about it. So that's actually a significant change in the evolution of the planet that has come about by our civilization. Now, if we can keep our civilization, if you can keep it, that we should be able to prevent that threat from ever from ever striking Earth again, which wasn't true until very recently. So,
are we potentially dangerous to them?
Potentially, absolutely. I mean, we are dangerous, potentially dangerous to all life forms on our planet here. So we could also be potentially dangerous to life form elsewhere, whether consciously or unconsciously so, right? So if we decide to not only send sanitized robots to Mars, but if we actually send humans that cannot be completely sanitized, we're not just sending ourselves, we're sending all the microbes, all the bacteria and viruses that live in us and on us. And even if we don't want to hurt any life forms on Mars, but just the microbes, the viruses, the bacteria that we bring with us could potentially have a devastating effect on life elsewhere, just as, for instance, germs that we've brought to other parts of the world in the history of colonial expansion, imperialism, was devastating.
I mean, it's worth pointing out we have something called planetary protection, which is that as we explore the rest of the solar system, we've been very careful there's been an effort, there are rules and laws and international agreements that we do everything we can to prevent contaminating other places.
Okay.
Not that we couldn't accidentally, and especially when we send humans, it's going to be harder to do that. But I think it's worth pointing out that we have not been oblivious as we explore the solar system. I would say we've been very responsible, maybe more than we need to be, because it's very unlikely that we probably could harm another biosphere accidentally, because that presupposes that our germs could be compatible with them enough to hurt them. But we've actually put a lot of care and it's much more expensive to explore the solar system that way because you have to clean your spacecraft and do all kinds of extraordinary efforts. But so we've done that. So there's been sort of an ethical component to our exploration so far.
For the scientific community, but I'm wondering from where you've sat.
Whether humanity could be dangerous to other civilizations? Well, we might, if we encounter other civilizations, there might be ideas that humans have, belief systems, philosophies that are not currently ones that have taken hold in those other civilizations, but which might be very seductive, might take hold, and might do them some harm. There's something, I don't know what it might be, but something to us quite innocuous that they look at us and say, hey, let's do that. And suddenly they're on a path to destruction.
Aren't there already? Yeah, please.
I would also agree with, both of you, but also with David, that yes, on the whole, we, as in the scientific community, we have been sort of very careful, let's say, to sanitize any spacecraft, any robots that we send to Mars, for example. But not everybody in the space business has been as responsible as the scientific community would like.
You use the word business.
Exactly. So famously, Elon Musk sent a Tesla car into the solar system, into an orbit around the sun. And I don't think that Tesla car was as sanitized as, let's say, a NASA spacecraft. And of course...
But it wasn't going anywhere.
It wasn't going anywhere, but the orbit might still change of that object. It is still possible that Tesla spacecraft could still crash into Mars at some point.
Oh, he wouldn't like that because doesn't he want to colonize Mars? Isn't that on the table?
Let me circle back and answer again. You give a practical answer to your last question about another way that we might be a threat. And I talked about ideas taking hold. And I know the problem with all of this is that we can only look at this in an anthropocentric point of view. So a lot of this is assumption. But let's suppose there are other civilizations out there that have figured out nuclear power, but just in terms of their mindset, they've never thought to make a weapon out of it. But they look and they see what they're doing and say, hey, you can't only run power stations, you can make a big bomb.
Yeah. And there's also something that doesn't need to be designed as a weapon that can be incredibly damaging. We see this right now with the problem of space debris, but with sort of increasingly too many objects in Earth orbits, right? With satellite constellations owned by Starlink, sort of other space companies, and most of the satellites that we have out there are not sort of weapons in any conventional sense, but they are objects that move at incredibly high speed around the Earth and then can crash into one another and produce thousands of little bits that, again, move at incredibly high speed. So
that's a potential threat to ourselves. It's hard to imagine how that would be a threat to extraterrestrials. But
here's a scenario, though. Let's suppose that we were visited by another civilization and they come here and we don't give them sort of godlike qualities. We figure that if they get here, yes, sure, they're probably more advanced, but not infinitely so. And they come here and their craft gets impacted by a lot of our debris. And then they say to themselves, hey, this planet's got a kind of defensive shield and they've just wiped out. We were coming here to do a peaceful first contact and they've just destroyed our ship because they've got all these particles orbiting at high speed and they've just ripped us up.
That's
David, I'm wondering, in the scientific community, are there ethical considerations to perhaps opening this kind of exploration up to special interests? I mean, how quickly does fascination with a potential discovery become opportunity for nefarious actors?
Yeah, well, I would say in the scientific community, there's a lot of concern and pretty widespread, maybe not universal, sort of ethical standard that let's not mess up other planets. Certainly the more pragmatic reason is let's not do it, at least until we've had a chance to study them. Like, the planetary protection that I mentioned, there's sort of two components of that. One is ethical. It's not, you don't want to just sort of wipe out another biosphere inadvertently. But admittedly, there's also just the curiosity factor. That would mess up our science. We don't want to go to Mars and accidentally discover microbes that we took there ourselves, right? So that's the general presumption. It does get more complicated if we discovered, say, something valuable that could be mined, or I don't think we're in danger of that immediately. We know that some asteroids have a lot of valuable minerals, but the idea that you could go through the expense of mining them and then bring them back to Earth and then it would be worth that is pretty far-fetched. So people talk more about mining asteroids to develop a space economy. They would be useful if there were things you needed them for in space, but the only way to do that is to sort of create this economy out there that doesn't exist. There are people that very much want to do that, and that's where there's some interesting sort of ethical disagreement, because I think there are definitely people within the scientific community that will say, no, let's not mine asteroids or mine the moon because those places have intrinsic worth and they shouldn't be screwed up even if there's nobody living there because of sort of intrinsic value. And there are others who feel like, well, if nobody's living there, it's just a pile of rocks. Let's mine it. Who cares? So it's actually, there are different gradations. I think if there's a potential biosphere, then there's pretty much universal agreement that, like, hey, let's tread lightly there.
What about colonization? there's someone there.
Yeah, it's funny. That's a really loaded word because of the history of that word. So I tend to personally shy away from it and talk about settlement. Although I understand that, if you're talking about a place,
a bit. No?
If you're talking about a place where nobody's ever lived, then it's not really analogous to not just no humans, but no any creature. It's not really analogous to colonization on Earth and the history of that. But
are there
leaving semantics aside,
place? People stand
yes,
on
yes. I'd say there's not a universal stance on that within the scientific community. It's everything from look at how one extreme is look at what we've done on Earth. We obviously don't have the moral fiber. Let's just leave those places alone because otherwise we'll just screw them up. And then the other extreme end of that is through moving into the solar system and creating new spaces for civilization, we can actually help humanity advance morally and sort of become the responsible, long-lived creatures we want to be. And, I think between those two extremes, there's a whole gradation of belief.
Sheikh Hamza, what are the most plausible, unexplainable phenomenon that intrigue you the most, that interest you the most?
I guess I'm intrigued by the unexplained aspects of UFO sightings, and I think that that is I'm a little bit I wouldn't want to actually study it myself because I'm apprehensive about studying that realm of existence, but it is something. Jinn, I think it's the jinn are creatures that there's believers among them and there's disbelievers among them.
So you're convinced it's jinn?
I would have to look at it more carefully to reach a conclusive decision, but it looks like that from a distance, and that means that so normally it's associated. It's normally associated with some kind of demonic practice, some unethical, to say the least, human activity around it. It can be harmful, it can be damaging, and the way to combat it is not through some kind of like a natural technological solution, but the way to combat it would be through prayers and through recitation of the Quran, things like that. So,
what qualities point to it from your perspective being demonic? What are the qualities?
Well, so because
you mentioned the recognition of the potentiality of demonic forces as well, which I found interesting. So
when the presence of jinn is associated with anxiety, worry. It's associated with there's abductions that can also happen. There's often repeat phenomena. So I read, I'm interested in asking whether or not that's true, but that people who see it once they feel like it might happen again to them. They feel like they're being watched. There's reports of things like this. All of that, and I think just a general unethical conduct of people in military and government all over the world doesn't seem like a very ethical place to be. So the convergence of all of those factors.
And I've seen those concerns articulated, certainly in the British government, or parts of it, certainly as a minority report, should we say. And some of the whistleblowers with verifiable backgrounds in UAP and in the United States have talked about it too. And they've talked about, one whistleblower, Luis Elizondo, told an account of how he was trying to get more resources put into UAP research, and he was told, no, by someone at a more senior level, well, I don't agree with this because some of these may be unclean spirits, demons, and you shouldn't engage with them because that feeds them and gives them energy. Now, you find this across a spread of different religions, and you find it in a secular world too. I mean, almost every society in human history has had some sort of other entities, and whether we call them jinn or demons or angels or dwarves, elves, fairies, goblins, the culture of this other intelligence interacting with us. And the idea that sometimes they are at best perhaps mischievous or deceivers, at worst maybe malevolent, is something that's remarkably cross-cultural.
And I'm wondering your thoughts on the question I asked Sheikh Hamza, which is, what are the most plausible unexplained phenomena that interest you the most?
The ones that interest me most are I suppose, UAP data that might indicate, though it's open to interpretation, things like speeds, maneuvers, and accelerations that seem to go beyond the cutting edge of our own aerospace technology. Now, is that a sensor error? Is that something else, like some parallax effect or something, or is it genuine data? I don't know. But of course, some of the whistleblowers have gone much further than that. Some of the whistleblowers have alleged that there are still classified programs somewhere in the US, maybe intelligence community, but perhaps in the private sector, that actually have hardware, crashed, ships. Well, I don't know that that's true, but if it is true, let's try to find out, because that would be paradigm changing.
What about you?
Well, it would be paradigm changing, but I'm highly skeptical of that because there's never been any evidence produced. Some of this stuff supposedly goes back decades, and the rationale for why you would keep it so secret just doesn't add up. Give us some of that stuff to look at in the laboratory, and we could tell you if it comes from Earth very easily or not. And there's a history, a verified history of the military. The military community spreading false stories about alien technology in order to cover up classified stuff they were doing that was military technology. The famous Roswell incident, where it turned out something did crash. And then the press started telling stories about, this is Roswell, New Mexico, 1947?
47, yeah.
And the press started spreading stories about, this farmer found something that, maybe it was aliens. And the military knew that it wasn't. They knew what it was, that it was some Cold War secret technology that had crashed. But it was convenient for them to say, let's let this alien story spread. And there are other examples
convenient
also.
Just to cover their track.
Yeah, exactly. And there were other examples more recent from the 1980s of sightings. Turned out a lot of the UFO sightings in the 1980s were classified military aircraft. And again, it was sort of convenient for them to let these stories spread. So
and interestingly, right, we are now in a similar moment in time as perhaps we were in the 1940s, also the 1980s, right? We are in a new Cold War at the moment, right? We are again sort of having the world being divided into different powers that seem to be competing with one another. But this is a time just like in the 1940s and 1950s, right, where you had like the dawn of the space age, where you just had a lot more new objects in the sky. Back in the 1940s and 50s, it was rockets, and then was the first satellite, Sputnik, where of course governments were very, very interested in looking at the sky, seeing, tracking rockets, tracking satellites, and sometimes also encouraging the public to share observations, right? Has anybody seen a Russian satellite or something that anomalous in the sky? Now, obviously, right, we are at a time where we have an increasing number of satellites in Earth orbit, where we have an increasing number of drones, and we have weather balloons too, for instance, those Chinese weather balloons that can produce a lot of paranoia, right? So we are sort of at a similar moment in time where sort of...
But unlike then, now there are literally billions of cell phones with really sophisticated cameras all around the world, and there are amateur astronomers with really sophisticated equipment all around the world. And so it would be much harder for something to go unnoticed by the public. And yet, where's the evidence?
I hear your skepticism, but what are the most plausible unexplained phenomena that you are most interested in? The same question.
All right, good question. So when I was on this NASA UAP independent committee, we, for instance, we talked to a couple of pilots. There's a famous incident, the Tic Tac incident, which was a aircraft group off of San Diego, and you probably know the dates better than I.
2004, I think that one was.
That's in the early 2000s. They saw something. It's called the Tic Tac because of like the little snack thing that was shaped like a big Tic Tac, moving in an unusual way. Multiple pilots saw this. I've spoken to one of the pilots. I don't think that she made this up. She was very convinced she had seen it. She didn't know what she had seen. I think it was good faith reporting, and I have no idea what she saw. And to me, it's very mysterious. It doesn't say aliens because I don't have any reason to think, that I would need more to know that. But I do think from that and other. Again, it's frustrating because there's no data. In fact, they had some data that was not kept because their commander said, well, it's not related to our mission, whatever this thing is. And so one of the recommendations that our NASA panel made was keep all the data no matter what and collect better data. So
sorry, that's just fodder for conspiracy theorists, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why wouldn't he keep the data? Why would he order them to get rid of the data?
The mindset was very much, this isn't part of your mission, whatever that was. I know it's frustrating, but
how did your friend feel about that?
I think she was frustrated by it.
But was did she find it suspicious?
She didn't describe it in a way that was suspicious. She said that was the protocol. Remember, this was
remove the data.
This was in the date when this was, this was not just like a thumb drive. These were like tapes that had to be stored somewhere, and
Sure.
I
can't have the closet space.
I can't defend this because I think it sounds really stupid to me.
Well, I can give a practical
I'm not
example.
trying to stir it, but it does sound suspicious to me.
I can give a practical example of this. Back when I was doing UAP in the 90s, we literally downloaded radar data onto VHS video cassettes. We kept them for about a month, and then just because we didn't want tens of thousands of tapes, we reused them, and so within a month the data was gone. But the wider problem, here is that previously, when we've acquired information about UAP, it's been what I would call accidental detection, because the sensor platforms that detect these things are not designed to detect UAP. They're designed to detect for foreign military aircraft, for example. And that's one of the reasons why Congress has said, well, go out and get some meaningful data rather than this sort of accidental leakage.
Right. And we very much recommended the same thing. And we also talked to a lot of commercial pilots. And there is a stigma where commercial pilots that have seen things they can't explain are encouraged not to report it because they don't want people to think they're nuts and get grounded. And so, again, it's anecdotal and it's a handful of reports and they're not consistent and it doesn't make a lot of sense. But it seems to me that, there's still a lot about our world that isn't well observed and that we don't understand. And there are examples of natural phenomena that were on our planet that were only discovered recently. Like there are these things called sprites, which are these high altitude lightning displays, which were reported anecdotally and discounted. And now they're observed better, and it turns out they exist. So I certainly think there are phenomena in our atmosphere that have been observed sparsely and are not well understood. There's a lot of historical examples of things that were considered to be just false reports and then turned out to be real meteorites. Thomas Jefferson famously said, "I would sooner believe 2 Yankee professors would lie than that rocks would fall from the sky." When these 2 Yale professors reported that that they had found evidence that meteorites came from the sky. Well, Thomas Jefferson was wrong. Rocks do fall from the sky, and these Yankee professors weren't lying. So I think that there's no reason to believe that we've cataloged everything that can be observed in Earth's atmosphere.
And then we also write, in certain instances, we don't have enough data, but we also have so much data that we haven't sufficiently analyzed, right? So, for instance, we have over 100 years worth of photographic plates that were sort of the main storage device for astronomical images. And over the last 20 years, a lot of these hundreds of thousands of photographic plates that would show the sky, that would show the stars, celestial objects of all kinds. They have been scanned, but still we have nowhere nearly exhaustively analyzed them. So there might still be, like you mentioned, sprites. So there might still be phenomena in our atmosphere that we have actually recorded that might be saved in a photographic plate or in an old VHS tape that still exists, but that we haven't been able to analyze properly or detect the patterns yet that one could detect later on.
Could AI help us with that?
Yes.
Is there hope that now,
this
the
is
age
one
of AI,
this is one of the
LLMs?
promises of not just AI, but what we call big data, and machine learning, which is related to AI, but not quite the same thing, that you could, potentially feed all, the ones that haven't been destroyed, all these VHS tapes and all these old photographic plates, and have the machines go at it and look for patterns. And then, of course, the humans are going to have to find out if it's real or they're hallucinating or finding something spurious. But there are potentially new tools that could really help us do that search in a much more comprehensive way.
Sheikh Hamza, bringing us back to the original question, if we were to discover non-human intelligence, extraterrestrial beings, do you think it would humble us, or would it completely shake our sense of self?
So, speaking for myself, I think that so if it humbles us, if the discovery of intelligent extraterrestrial life humbles us, then that means that before we discovered intelligent extraterrestrial life, we thought a lot about ourselves, right? So to be humbled by the discovery in that way is not, I don't think it paints a good picture of how we're supposed to be. So our humility comes from seeing our own shortcomings and humbling ourselves before God. So the discovery of intelligent extraterrestrial life, would it humble me? Would it humble us from this perspective? Perhaps. I guess it would show the majesty of God, that He's created. He has that the magnificence of His creation extends beyond this earth into the universe, which goes back to, which is like my equivalent of what David is hoping to see, all over the universe. So I think I don't think it would be related to.
I would agree with that. Depends on your own sort of attitude, your own personality. If you are used to thinking you're first, you're leading, then seeing somebody else who is first, who is leading, maybe who is more advanced, let's say a civilization that maybe have conquered death, for instance, or where you have incredibly long lifespan and elimination of disease, poverty, and so on. So if you if you're used to you thinking that you're first, and then somebody else is ahead of you, that humbles you. But maybe we are just here talking about a small fraction of the human population who think they're first, right? In the United States of America, there is a lot of worry, sometimes panic about losing American leadership to China, right? That China could be somehow first, and America would be left behind. For a lot of people in other countries in the world, they kind of, it's not that big of a deal whether it's America that's first or whether it's China it's first. I mean, they're kind of used to sort of another country sort of being ahead of them in some way. So if you are yourself sort of maybe more conscious of your own, I don't know, mediocrity in the sense of you're sort of just somewhere in the middle, then it's less of a shock to know that, okay, somebody else is ahead of you.
But for those with deep nationalism, like a country like the US, among large populations, do you think it would change that? How would it impact nationalism?
That's a good point, right? So yes, some people in the United States are deeply worried about China being ahead in some area of life, right? Whether it's ahead in science or ahead in technology or ahead in military. If you then had sort of another power that would be even more ahead of you, that could be sort of worrying, if not shocking.
Well, I hope that if we discover intelligent extraterrestrial life, or a non-human intelligence, should I say, that it would teach us to be a little bit more humble, to take a broader perspective. It might, and I know this is very kind of cliched and soundbitey, but it might teach us that as humans, there is more that binds us together than sets us apart. And I think, again, it takes us back to this question about the intersectionality between intelligence, technology, and thing. And one thing, and altruism, one thing I'd like to mention is curiosity. And I think my personal feeling about this is I'm not necessarily always a believer in human exceptionalism, but one of the things that I do like is the idea that we're curious, that we climb a mountain to see what's on the other side. It's not always just about resources or finding a mate or killing an enemy. It's about wanting to know what's out there. And I want to turn that around, because if we are, if we do discover an extraterrestrial civilization, or they discover us, I like to think and hope that they would be driven by the same motives, by curiosity, that they come here as explorers and scientists, because I hope that's what we'd do if the situation was reversed.
I think there's argument to be made. There's reason to believe they would be. I mean, that curiosity has adaptive value, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking in terms of evolution, that's why we have science and probably religion and other developments, because we want to understand the world, and that's partly why we've been successful as a species. And presumably, somebody on some other planet that's evolving, and they've filled that niche of having cognitive abilities and the ability to observe the universe and create technologies. That curiosity, I believe, for those kind of same evolutionary reasons, would be endemic to them as well.
And I'd like to think that they come here as anthropologists, and that, look, we are not going to have much, if anything, to teach an advanced civilization about science or engineering, but they might be much more interested in the abstract things: art, literature, music, poetry, all those sorts of things. So that's what I hope they're here for, or that if they arrive, they will be here for.
Yeah, the physics, they'd be like, we know all that stuff, but
been there, done that.
Show us what you've got that we've never seen.
I think it's interesting. It's always interesting to have different people in a room and hear everybody's perspectives and learn from them. So I think, like, if you had an alien in the room, it would enrich the conversation, and we'd have a lot to learn.
Maybe one day we could host a debate with an alien. I mean, if we, if we discover them.
And what questions aren't we asking? One fun thing people often ask is, what would you ask an alien? And my answer to that is, I would say, what's the smartest thing I could ask you? Because my point is that would direct us to what is truly important, which might be something that we just haven't thought of yet.
Something I'm still a bit hung up on is what David mentioned about commercial pilots, and the fact that there seems to be some kind of stigmatization around reporting sightings. And Nick, I'm curious with you, pop culture depictions, sci-fi, little green men, those interpretations, did they make your job harder?
They made it much harder. And I've personally spoken to many pilots, both military and civilian, who have said that they have had spectacular reports which they never made public because they feared that they would be grounded or that they would find promotion more difficult. So they just kept silent. That's changing, but it's still there. But that's one of the reasons why we changed the terminology from UFO to UAP. No pilot wanted to say, I've seen a UFO, because the implication might be, hey, he's thinking he's seeing little green men. But it's kind of easier to say, I've encountered a UAP, because that has connotations that it's more scientific, that it's more maybe some sort of next generation aircraft or drone.
How did we go though from conspiracy theory, fringe conspiracy theory even, to now official narrative?
Well, I think it's a number of different things, but I think it is the fact that in the United States, for example, the newspaper that first broke the story of the Tic Tac and an associated government program that was looking at that sort of thing was the New York Times.
I remember that.
Yeah, when you have the newspaper of record actually putting this story on the front page, it does change the conversation, and I think that was a good thing.
Yeah, I also think that in the longer term, I think popular culture has also been helpful. Yes, sometimes there is the fear that you get ridiculed if you talk about green men or UFOs, but because UFOs and green men have been in our popular culture for so long, that means generations now of politicians have also grown up with this. Have seen UFO movies, have watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and because they've grown up with it, you now have also politicians who are more willing to fund space research more broadly, to fund NASA astrobiology program, or to have a congressional investigation into UFOs, because for these politicians, UFOs are not some sort of strange fringe, but it's something that has been on the television screens when they grew up.
I agree, yes. And I think that pop culture is not necessarily always a bad thing. I mean, Steven Spielberg makes his movies with wonder and hope, and science fiction books and films like Contact, of course, was written by Carl Sagan before it was made into the movie. Films like Arrival, again, maybe teach us to approach this from a little bit more of a humble mindset.
David, do you and your colleagues resent that it took governments to make us take this seriously and not the scientific community?
To some degree, in that I think people that pursue astrobiology and technosignature searches are generally, myself included, pretty skeptical of these reports of sort of classified sightings that, that they can't produce any evidence because it's so secretive, and so we're frustrated, as I said before, because we want to see the evidence. And so to the extent that the public is aware of this topic through these kind of sensationalistic and not necessarily reliable reports, we maybe are a little bit resentful. But on the other hand, if, as you've said, it gets people to think and maybe be open to this idea, and then through that sort of roundabout way opens them to the curiosity and the wonder, and therefore acceptance and maybe even support of astrobiology, then that's a good thing.
Do you think that I think like looking at things from a naturalistic scientific perspective, it has great value because, as you mentioned, like you can discover something that you didn't know before, and somebody imagined they were seeing something that was amazing, and then you come up with a scientific explanation for it. But if in the universe there were phenomena that don't follow the naturalistic process, then merely applying that lens would blind one to the existence of such things. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think it's often said that science is sort of dogma free and is self-correcting. On one level, that's true, but on another level, there are sort of these precepts that we accept, and that we rule out phenomena that aren't subject to examination by our methods, and so. I think we have to be broad-minded, and sort of always question our assumptions. And if presented with some kind of phenomena that really didn't fit my worldview, then I would have to question that worldview. But I guess that's why for instance, I don't describe myself as an atheist, even though I'm not a practitioner of any mainstream religion. I consider myself, open-minded and interested in other ways of looking at the world. But part of the reason I say that is because I think, it requires the humility to realize that we actually are making assumptions, even as scientists, even with that naturalistic worldview. We like to think that we're not, that we don't have any dogma, but that's absolutely not true. If we require things to be verifiable and repeatable in order to exist, what if they're phenomena that aren't?
Exactly.
There's no axiomatic knowledge of that. So it does come down to a sort of way of looking at the universe, even though we often don't like to admit that.
And what gives me hope is that we have indeed, despite all the divisions in the world, that we have people who from different backgrounds, different worldviews, coming together, just like we are now around this table here, right? Maybe now more than ever before, for instance, we have scientists and filmmakers entering each other's worlds, right? Where we have films, let's say like Interstellar, where you have a filmmaker like Christopher Nolan working with world-leading scientists like Kip Thorne. It's becoming more and more acceptable for scientists to sort of enter, for instance, the world of pop culture, to enter the world of Hollywood. And it's also maybe more common to have people from religious backgrounds, from theological backgrounds, entering into conversations with researchers, journalists of various disciplines, right? Even like art and science, right? The City Institute, for instance, in California, also hosts artists in residence. And I believe that in order to truly explore and understand all the mysteries of the cosmos and all the phenomena that are still unexplained, we need to have all the brains that we have. We need to have people from all backgrounds and with all kinds of trainings asking different questions and offering their insights.
Nick, do you agree?
I completely agree. David's UAP panel were a case in point about probably saw more intersection between NASA scientists and, say, the classified black program intelligence community world. And we see that all the time. I think making this interdisciplinary is a great thing. I mean, chaos theory, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe that the seminal article was actually published somewhat counterintuitively in a meteorological journal. So the lesson is that there are things out there that somebody else knows, and you're challenge is always finding who that somebody else is and finding out what they know. And again, AI, if we can get a lot of this digitized, is a huge opportunity here for that.
Well, and astrobiology is inherently interdisciplinary, not just within the sciences, although it's true. It's been a challenge of, since astrobiology became a field, which is really since the late 1990s, stimulated by that finding of that Mars rock that you mentioned that may have had microfossils in it, which probably didn't, but it really stimulated a movement to take this more seriously scientifically. And it was realized that you needed astronomers and biologists and earth scientists and meteorologists and chemists, all these people that were used to talking in their own specialized language to work together. And it really has created this interdisciplinary community. And what's happened more recently is that there have been more conversations with philosophers and theologians and sociologists and artists. And actually NASA sponsors this program at the Library of Congress that specifically invites scholars to work at the intersection between the humanities and the sciences, because of recognizing that this subject requires more than just science. So it's a work in progress, but I do feel like those boundaries are loosening up and people are crossing them over because they realize that to grapple with profound questions like this, you have to kind of break out of your disciplinary trenches.
Final question. I'll start with you, Sheikh Hamza. If humanity is not alone, what responsibility does that place on us moving forward?
So if there is intelligent extraterrestrial life, then it's our responsibility to reach out to them, to get to know them, to discover them, and to communicate with them and to convey the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to them and have conversations with them, learn their perspectives, learn their language, learn their culture. Yeah.
Matthias?
Yeah, I think it would be the responsibility on all of us to be just as open-minded as we can, maybe as open-minded as we've never been before, towards that sort of other culture, perhaps that other technology, that other biology as well. So we should essentially tear down all the sort of walls that we have in our head in order sort of to make room for all that sort of is possible when you are in touch with another civilization from another planet.
David?
I think that it would present an opportunity and a responsibility to enlarge our sense of community, to learn as much as we could about them and from them. And even if we can't learn anything specific from them by communicating, I think just the knowledge of their existence would be a tremendous learning experience. And I'd like to think that it would help us confront the notion that we have a responsibility and again, an opportunity to survive, and that means solving our problems here on Earth and sort of rising to that occasion of becoming part of a galactic community. And the way to do that is to be more open to one another, in addition to being open to them, and just sort of learn how to get along. And then if we can do that, then the universe is our playground.
Nick?
I think with any defining moment in human history, there are threats and opportunities. The nearest analogy I can think of to discovering that we're not alone, something that came suddenly and unexpectedly from left field and changed all our lives, is COVID, which we mentioned before. So I think in relation to discovering that we're not alone in the universe, the responsibility that we have is not repeating the mistakes of COVID. Let's not make it political. Let's not shout at each other. I like David's point that this is an opportunity. And although there are threats and opportunities, let's focus on the opportunity. Let's talk to each other. Let's be humble. And rather than trying to force our views on other people or shout other viewpoints down, let's listen to each other and let's try to learn something.
Thank you all so much. That was a really interesting conversation. It's going to stay with me for a while. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You've been a great
for
moderator.
joining us. Thank you.
Wonderful question.
Thank you so much. You've been great guests.